Nobody turns hostile all at once. That's not how it works. When the power goes out, your neighborhood doesn't collapse in an instant. It decays in stages. And if you're not watching closely, you'll miss the exact moments when the person next door stops seeing you as a friend and starts seeing you as a resource, an obstacle, or a threat. Because here's what every major blackout in modern history has proven. The shift from community to competition doesn't happen randomly. It follows a pattern, a precise, repeatable, almost mechanical sequence of psychological breaking points that disaster researchers have documented again and again. And the worst part isn't the violence that sometimes comes at the end. The worst part is the silence in the middle, those strange in-between hours when everything still looks normal on the surface, but underneath, the entire social structure of your street is being rewired by fear, hunger, and suspicion. So, these are the 6 moments when your neighbors stop being friendly during a blackout. Learn them now, because once you're inside them, it's already too late to prepare. Number 6. The moment the first rumor spreads about who has supplies. It doesn't take a week. It doesn't take looting or violence or starvation. The first fracture in your neighborhood happens the moment someone says 5 words out loud. Quote, 0. That's it. That single sentence spoken on a sidewalk, whispered across a fence, mentioned in a garage, rewires the entire social dynamics of the block in ways that cannot be undone. And it happens fast, usually within the first 36 to 48 hours. Before that, people are operating on the assumption that everyone is in the same situation. The shared suffering creates a temporary bond. Psychologists call it perceived equity of hardship. As long as everyone believes they're equally affected, cooperation holds. But the moment someone is identified as having more, that perception of equity shatters, and it shatters permanently. Disaster sociologists studying residential behavior during extended outages have found that resource rumors are one of the single strongest predictors of neighborhood conflict escalation, not actual resource disparity. Rumors about it, because perception doesn't need to be accurate to be dangerous, it just needs to be believed. And in a blackout where information is scarce and anxiety is high, belief spreads faster than fact. During Hurricane Maria's prolonged grid failure in Puerto Rico, community case studies documented how specific households became targets, not because they displayed wealth or hoarded visibly, but because a single neighbor mentioned seeing a delivery before the storm, or noticed a garden, or remembered a conversation about canning supplies from months earlier. That memory, once spoken aloud, became a community fact within hours. And community facts attract community action. Here's the part most people miss. The rumor doesn't have to be about you specifically. It just has to be about someone on your block. Because once the idea that _quote_1_ enters the collective consciousness, everyone starts scanning, everyone starts comparing, everyone starts watching. And the neighborhood moves from shared hardship into a new phase, one defined by suspicion, comparison, and silent inventory of every household within sight. The first rumor is the first crack, and cracks only grow. Number 5. The moment someone asks for help and gets told no. Let me hit you with something that sounds like a small interaction, but carries devastating social consequences. In the early days of a blackout, there's a careful, almost choreographed politeness to how neighbors interact. People offer small things, a candle, a bottle of water, a few crackers. It's performative generosity designed to maintain the illusion of community. And it works, as long as the answer is always yes. But the moment someone asks for something and hears no, even gently, even with a valid explanation, the social contract takes its first real hit. Because no doesn't just deny a resource, it creates a category. It separates the neighborhood into those who give and those who withhold. And in a crisis, withholding is interpreted as hoarding, regardless of the truth. Behavioral researchers studying interpersonal dynamics during resource scarcity call this the refusal inflection point. It's the precise moment when a relationship shifts from cooperative to adversarial, not through aggression, but through perceived rejection. The person who hears no doesn't process it logically. They process it emotionally. They hear, "You don't matter enough." They hear, "I have it but I'm choosing not to share." They hear, "I'm protecting mine at your expense." And that emotional interpretation calcifies. It becomes a grievance, and grievances in a blackout don't fade. They compound. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, Sociological interviews with residents in affected urban neighborhoods revealed that many of the interpersonal conflicts that emerged on day 4 and 5 traced directly back to a single denied request on day 1 or 2. The refusal itself was often minor: a flashlight, some batteries, a cup of rice. But the emotional impact was disproportionate because in a crisis, every interaction carries amplified weight. Normal social friction becomes a wound, and wounds get remembered. Here's the deeper problem. The first no doesn't just affect the person who hears it. It ripples. They tell their household. Their household mentions it to the family next door. Suddenly, your polite decline becomes a story about selfishness. And that story enters the neighborhood rumor network from moment number 6. See how these connect? The first no is never just a no. It's a declaration of boundaries that others interpret as a declaration of sides. And once sides exist, friendliness doesn't just fade. It becomes structurally impossible. You're not neighbors anymore. You're factions. And factions don't share porches. They watch each other through curtains. Number 4. The moment the children start crying. This is the turning point that nobody is emotionally prepared for, and it changes the psychology of the entire street within hours. In the first couple of days, adults manage. They ration quietly. They distract themselves. They maintain composure because adults understand the concept of waiting. Children don't, and when a child is hungry or scared or cold, they don't process it internally. They broadcast it. A child crying from hunger at 2 in the morning on a silent, powerless street is not just a sound. It's a psychological weapon that detonates inside every parent within earshot. And it doesn't produce sympathy. It produces panic. Because every parent who hears that sound immediately projects it onto their own children and thinks, that's going to be us next. Neuroscience research on parental stress response shows that the sound of a distressed child activates threat processing centers in the brain at a level comparable to a physical alarm. It bypasses rational thought. It goes straight to the survival circuitry. And in a neighborhood where resources are shrinking, that activation doesn't just create personal anxiety. It creates collective urgency. Suddenly, the timeline accelerates. People who were willing to wait on day 2 become desperate by day 3, not because their situation changed, but because the sound of a suffering child reframed their perception of how bad things actually are. Disaster psychologists call this empathic threat acceleration. The suffering of others, especially children, compresses people's psychological timeline. They stop thinking in days and start thinking in hours. And that compressed timeline makes every decision more aggressive, more impulsive, more zero-sum. During extended power failures documented across multiple hurricane aftermaths, aid workers consistently reported that neighborhood tension escalated sharply once children's distress became audible. Before that, adults maintained a fragile patience. After that, patience evaporated. Because a crying child isn't just a child in pain. It's a countdown clock that every parent on the block can hear. And once that clock starts, people don't ask for help anymore. They demand it. They insist. They justify anything that stops the sound. The moment children start crying publicly during a blackout is the moment the neighborhood crosses a line it can never walk back. Adults can pretend everything is manageable. A child's scream cuts through every layer of that pretense and forces every household to confront the reality that time is running out. And people confronting that reality don't negotiate, they act. Number 3. The moment someone sees you carrying something inside. Let me tell you something that seems completely mundane but functions as one of the most critical exposure events in a blackout. You walk to your car. You open the trunk. You carry a bin, a bag, a case of water, a box of anything from your vehicle to your front door. It takes 12 seconds. And in those 12 seconds, you've communicated more to your neighborhood than a week of conversation would. Because in a powerless, resource-depleted environment, visual evidence of supply movement is the single most potent trigger for targeting behavior. It's not speculation. It's confirmation. Your neighbor didn't hear a rumor. They didn't guess. They saw it with their own eyes. And eyewitness confirmation of resources activates an entirely different psychological response than secondhand information. Criminologists studying opportunistic residential crime call this the confirmation event. It's the moment a potential target transitions from suspected to verified. And verified targets attract action exponentially faster than suspected ones, because suspicion can be rationalized away. But a direct visual of someone carrying supplies into their home cannot be unseen, cannot be forgotten, and cannot be reinterpreted as anything other than what it is, proof that you have what others don't. During the 2012 extended outages across the eastern seaboard following Superstorm Sandy, police reports from suburban neighborhoods documented that a significant number of reported break-ins and aggressive confrontations were preceded by the victim being observed transporting supplies, not displaying them, not bragging about them, simply moving them from point A to point B during a moment when someone else was watching. And here's the part that makes this so dangerous. In a blackout, everyone is watching. There's no television. There's no internet. There's no commute. There's nothing to do except sit, wait, and observe. Windows become screens. Porches become surveillance posts. And every movement on the street gets cataloged by dozens of bored, anxious, hungry pairs of eyes. You think you're just grabbing a bag from your car. Your neighbor thinks they just watched you resupply. And the difference between those two interpretations is the difference between being invisible and being a target. One trip, 12 seconds, and the entire neighborhood now has you filed under confirmed resources. That file doesn't get deleted. It gets shared. And once it's shared, the friendly phase of your blackout is over, whether you know it or not. Number 2, the moment a group forms on the street without you. Here's where the social dynamics shift from individual tension to collective threat. And it happens so quietly that most people don't register it as dangerous until it's far too late. Sometime around day 3 or 4, you'll notice something subtle. A small cluster of neighbors standing together, talking low, glancing around. Not the open casual gathering of day 1 where everyone was joking about the inconvenience. This is different. This is closed. Tight body language. Selective membership. And if you're not in that circle, you need to understand what that circle represents. Disaster sociologists call it spontaneous coalition formation, and it's one of the most reliable precursors to organized neighbor-on-neighbor action during extended crises. The group doesn't form randomly. It forms around shared grievance, and the grievance is almost always resource-based. Someone in that cluster has vocalized what everyone else was thinking. Quote 6. And once that question is spoken inside a group, it becomes a group problem with a group solution. And group solutions in a resource-depleted environment always involve redistribution, voluntary or otherwise. Research on collective behavior during urban crises has consistently demonstrated that the formation of exclusionary subgroups within a residential area is one of the final social stages before targeted action. It's the organizational phase. The emotional groundwork has already been laid by rumors, by refusals, by crying children, by visible supply movement. Now the group is assembling the operational structure to act on it. And here's the part that should unsettle you. The group doesn't need a formal leader. It doesn't need a plan written on paper. It just needs consensus. And consensus in a desperate group forms with terrifying speed. One person says, quote 7, another says, quote 8, a third says, quote 9. That's not a conversation. That's a mobilization sequence. 3 sentences and the group has a target, a primary strategy, and an implied secondary strategy, all without raising a single voice. During the prolonged blackout conditions documented in post-hurricane urban environments, community-level reports repeatedly noted that group formation preceded every major neighbor-to-neighbor confrontation by 12 to 36 hours. The group doesn't act immediately. They build agreement first. They solidify the narrative. They convince each other that what they're about to do isn't aggression, it's fairness. And by the time they walk toward your door, every single person in that group believes, genuinely and completely, that they're doing the right thing. That's what makes it unstoppable. Not anger, certainty. A group that believes it's justified is a group that will not back down. And if you're the household they've selected, you're not facing a mob. You're facing a jury that's already delivered the verdict. The moment you see a cluster of neighbors talking without you, with their voices low and their eyes moving, that is the moment the neighborhood has officially stopped being friendly. Everything before this was tension. This is architecture. This is the structure being built around a decision that's already been made. You just haven't been informed yet. Number 1, the moment someone knocks on your door after dark. This is the final moment, the one that separates everything that came before from everything that comes after. And it's the simplest one of all. A knock, after sundown, during a blackout. In normal life, a knock at night is an annoyance. Maybe a neighbor locked themselves out. Maybe a delivery came late. You open the door without thinking, but in a prolonged blackout, a knock after dark is a fundamentally different event. And the people who survive extended grid failures understand this instinctively, because nighttime in a blackout isn't just darkness. It's the absence of every system that normally protects you. No streetlights, no porch cameras, no phone to call for help, no way to verify who's on the other side. And the person knocking knows all of this. They chose this hour deliberately. Behavioral threat analysts call this the dark approach, and it's classified as one of the highest risk interpersonal events in residential crisis environments. The reasoning is simple. A neighbor who wants to talk, to check on you, to share information, does that during daylight. A neighbor who approaches your door after dark in a powerless neighborhood has a different calculation running. They're using the darkness as cover. They're using the isolation as leverage. They're approaching at the hour when your options are most limited and their advantage is greatest. During extended blackouts following multiple documented natural disasters, law enforcement data consistently shows that the overwhelming majority of residential confrontations, break-ins, and aggressive resource demands occurred between sunset and sunrise, not because criminals prefer darkness as some abstract concept, but because darkness in a blackout eliminates every passive security system that modern neighborhoods depend on. Visibility, communication, response time, witness availability, all of it evaporates after sundown. And your neighbors know this. Not consciously, maybe, but instinctively, absolutely. The knock after dark is the moment every preceding tension converts into action. The rumors from moment 6, the refused requests from moment 5, the crying children from moment 4, the confirmed supply sighting from moment 3, the coalition from moment 2. All of that pressure, all of that justification, all of that silent coordination, it arrives at your door in the form of knuckles against wood after the sun has gone down. And that sound carries a message that no words need to accompany. The friendly phase is over. The negotiation phase might already be over too. What's left is a transaction. And you may not get to set the terms. In every historical blackout that stretched beyond 5 days, the survivors who made it through unharmed share one common behavior. They treated a nighttime knock not as a social event but as a threat event. They didn't open immediately. They didn't assume good intentions. They understood that the darkness had changed the rules and they responded accordingly. Because in a blackout, night doesn't just hide people, it transforms them. The neighbor who smiled at you at noon becomes unrecognizable at midnight. Not because they changed, because the environment removed every constraint that was shaping their behavior in the first place. And that's the complete sequence. 6 moments, 6 fracture points, 6 stages in a process that turns the friendliest cul-de-sac in America into a place you wouldn't recognize. And the cruelest part of all is that none of it requires bad people. It doesn't require criminals or psychopaths or enemies. It only requires normal, decent, frightened human beings trapped in a situation where the systems that made them decent have been unplugged. The blackout doesn't create monsters. It removes the infrastructure that was keeping the monsters asleep. Your street is held together by electricity, supply chains, law enforcement, and the shared delusion that tomorrow will look like today. Take those away, and what's left isn't community. It's proximity. And proximity without systems is just a shorter distance between desperation and your front door. Learn the 6 moments, watch for them, because by the time you feel the shift, you're already inside it. And once you're inside it, the only thing separating you from the worst of it is whether you saw it coming, or whether you were still standing on the porch, wondering why nobody's waving back.